Hello HEMA friends and welcome to this new video. Today I want to talk about the Sporty guard, which is of course that guard in which we are right foot forward all the time and we keep the weapon online with the tip pointed at our opponent, ready for some very flashy movement like a very athletic lunge, flash or whatever. Now I want to talk about this guard in relation to the fact that this thing of calling it a sporty guard is basically a myth that we have created by ourselves, and it is not useful to anything basically. Actually, to better understand fencing, we have to destroy this kind of myth and understand instead why we are doing this kind of thing. If we watch a theory, of course we have right foot forward guards and left foot forward guards. Similar is for the German masters, but we have more focus in the gloss, especially while talking about footwork, movements, etc., attacks, whatever, on stepping with the right foot forward, which means that we have the left foot forward on average while standing in our guard position. We also have in Fiore, for instance, many guards which suggest an attacking position which are left foot forward, of course, and so we take for granted that, of course, that was the most important way of stepping while attacking, which maybe, most probably, for these masters it was the case. Who knows? We know for certain that there is a lot of mentions about stepping with the right foot forward, with a full step, in these kind of manuals. But let's jump to Vadi instead. So we jump from Fiore to Vadi and we see that the footwork is described in a slightly different way. The poste are slightly different and sometimes are similar to the Fiore ones, but with the feet inverted. And we can take some conclusions about his description of footwork. He says we are not using footwork in the way it was used by the old masters. And from his description, we may understand that he's starting to use some kind of lunges, basically. We move to Marazzo instead, and we see other ways of applying footwork. We see more focus on moving around on the circle. There is the star of Marazzo, of course. We also see that many actions in the assalti start with the right foot forward and with a position which has basically the weapon online in many occasions. So if we take all of this and we put it together as just informations about historical fencing, we easily understand that all the various masters conceived footwork in different ways and applied it in different ways, depending on most probably many factors that we are not taking into account sometimes. It is not only about being sporty, it is about many other things, such as the way in which you train or the way in which people around you is doing fencing, etc., etc. What is the tradition, of course. So all these things are, let's say, influencing footwork and the way of applying it. As I mentioned, if we put all of this together just as fencing knowledge, we find out all the things that we are using right now, such as keeping the right foot forward with the weapon online, lunging sometimes, but also stepping by starting with the right foot forward, and so doing some kind of feint or whatever to start our action, or a thrust on the outside or whatever. So we have all the possible options described basically if we take everything and we put it together to understand what we are actually doing right now as modern HEMA fencers. This way of conceiving fencing and thinking about it is actually really important, because we have to understand that we are a new context of fencing. So we want to recreate historical fencing, and We try to do it in a decent way, I would say, in most of the cases. But no matter what, we are a modern context of fencing. We have new equipment which modifies the ways in which we are training, and the way in which we are training modifies the way in which we are fencing. We are fencing also in a very specific context. There is sparring, which is our main setting in which we apply our fencing, which is basically training, of course. And we have the tournament, which is the testing ground. They had, in many cases and in many times, tournaments too. But in such cases, it was a, let's say, side aspect of application, which was together with other ones, such as dueling or fighting for self-defense or war or whatever. So no matter how much we try to do something different, let's say, from what we have to do because of our context of application, it is hard to move away from what we are right now. So we are just basically fighting our nature, in a sense. And yes, all of this has to do with our sporty guard. Right foot forward, weapon online, etc. Why? Well, of course, as I mentioned, we have a variety of reasons. First of all, our training environment makes for us easier to land very powerful thrusts, which I am sure at 99% they were extremely dangerous to land back in the days. In fact, we don't see them described so often, and they are not part of the various techniques we see described so often. They are mainly defensive in certain cases, and most of the time they are represented as parry posts with a thrust landing at the end, not necessarily as a stop thrust, which we find, of course, but lesser. We don't see a lot of offensive thrusts instead. We see lesser of them, and generally speaking are in later context of application, so later in time. This is most probably because of training motivations. I can for sure, just by looking at the manuals, say to you that Fiore, most probably Vadi, which was half away, it's not really easy to say, but Marozzo for sure. Fiore and Marozzo trained their students in a different way. Marozzo has katas, which are meant to mainly be done also by yourself, also at speed. Then there were applied, such as in the Japanese karate, you have katas, which are the forms, so the assalti of Marozzo, which could be used into training with the partner. So in Japanese karate is bunkai, and so you apply these parts of the assalto with the partner, which means that they had context of application which made for the application parts and others which were about the speed and power. When you are landing the action solo, you can land very powerful thrusts, cuts, whatever. You don't have to care. We are not sure that this was the approach of Fiore, for instance. We don't have assalti. We have instead parry drills. Parry drills are something that you have to do with control. Control is pretty important. You don't want to hurt your partner. We don't know which kind of gear they used. And I am eager to say that most probably they used no gear, almost, while training for Blossfechten, and as the Germans call it, so fencing without the armor. And they used the armor to train while training for the armor context. That's what it looks from many actions which are described, which seems to be adapted to this kind of context of training, so training basically without any kind of gear. We see this in many treaties, actually. this thing makes for a very different footwork. So if we have to work mainly with control, and we see this in Fiore, for instance, while training, we have a lot of full steps. Actually, full steps are easy to control, our main way of moving around, and if we do them relatively slowly, we are able to keep our balance and land anyway our action without entering too much toward our target, which is the crucial part when we want to control our weapon, because the higher risk we have, even with blunt swords, is to stab someone in the eye or whatever, or something around the face anyway. So it's a huge risk. That's why also we find certain actions which most probably were modified in their nature. We have the punta falsa, punta curta in Fiore, which is a feinted thrust, short thrust, which starts with a mezzano, because the mezzano is easier to control as it comes from out of the figure, and it is not a thrust toward the face, which, because of the perspective in which we see the weapon moving toward the target, it is hard to land a feint without creating many risks for our training partner, and so the action is modified. So again, all these things, all these aspects are what are influencing our footwork. More control is needed, a certain footwork is applied in training, and that training modifies fighting. In our modern context of training, we are using more explosive footwork because we can. We are able to do it because we are protected. We are thrusting more because we have access to more thrusting. In fact, thrusting is what changes the most our fencing compared to the one of our old masters. It is probably the thing that we are able to land the most nowadays compared to back in the days. And this modifies our approach to fencing in general. So when we see someone fencing in this way, we don't have to think about someone fencing sporty. We have to think about someone fencing today. That's the actual reality. Today it is possible to fence mainly in this position because thrusting, it's easier to land because we can train it far, far more and in a far, far better way. And so it becomes logical to use more this kind of guard. We are also training in a way which helps us using this kind of guard compared to the left one. We train more for the offense, we train more for thrusting. And all these things makes more rational to stay right foot forward compared to left one. Also, we need a lesser power to strike. And so it is not necessary to have this kind of huge displacement of weight to land a huge strike to cut down our opponent, because while our fencing is for sure, it will be for sure dangerous anyway while using a sharp sword, we're not training for cutting down anyone in the end. We are actually training to hit the opponent in a more or less realistic way, which is different. And so we don't have this kind of thing in mind. We don't have the idea of landing such a powerful hit to cut down someone with a single strike. We don't have anything after the first strike, which again, it doesn't mean that back in the days every single strike had been landed with strength and power in this kind of way, because sometimes just a tiny strike on the hands is enough to stop someone. At the same time, if you are attacking someone on the big target, maybe you want more power. And so it was also rational to take that in consideration. It was also rational to take in consideration that defending was even more important than what it is for us nowadays, because as Fiore says, when you are failing a coverta, when you are failing a defense, in this kind of context, or in blossfechten, you are dead or maimed or injured for your entire life. So it's different. It's a different context of application, and that's why we have our sporty guard in the end. It's a byproduct of a ton of different things. And it is not that it is not historical because we have all these aspects described in many different manuals. We can just pick what we need, and actually it is what we are doing right now, sometimes simply by observing the environment around us and adapting. But it is not that it is something specific that we invented and it is sporty because we disregard any aspect of fencing, the beauty of the art or whatever. No, we are just adapting to our context of application. This means that we can use any single manual that we have to improve our fencing, and we can learn from them. But at the same time, it means that we have to be serious and, let's say, mindful in accepting that our context of fencing is a modern one, with modern tools, with modern weapons, etc., etc., with modern goals. And this is what modifies our approach to fencing. And this is why we have our sporty guard in the first place. Very good, people. I hope you will find this video interesting or useful in some ways. Thanks for watching as always. Remember to check my Patreon link in the description if you want to support my work. And as always, see you next time.